Welcome back to SERA Self Discipline. I am glad you are here. And today I want to start with a question that cuts right to the heart of what this channel is about. What is the relationship between your inner world and your outer discipline? Because most people think about self-discipline as an external thing. It is about what you do. Your habits, your routine, your schedule, your actions. And those things matter enormously. We have talked about them across every episode of this series. But the greatest traditions of human formation across every civilization have always understood something deeper. That the outer discipline is only ever a reflection of the inner life. That what you do consistently on the outside is only as strong as what you have built on the inside. And that the inner life, the character, the soul, the quality of your heart, is itself something that must be deliberately cultivated, rigorously trained, and relentlessly refined. No tradition in human history has understood this more completely, or built more sophisticated systems for doing it, than the Islamic scholarly and spiritual tradition. Today we go to the deserts of Arabia, to the schools of Baghdad, to the Sufi lodges of Persia and Andalusia, to the courts of Timbuktu. Today we study one of the most remarkable and least discussed traditions of inner discipline in the world. And by the end of this episode, you will have a framework for self-cultivation that goes deeper than any routine or habit system you have ever encountered. Let us get into it. First, let me set the historical context. The Islamic civilization that emerged from the 7th century CE became within a few generations one of the most sophisticated, productive, and intellectually vibrant civilizations the world had ever seen. In an era when much of Europe was in what historians call the Dark Ages, Baghdad under the Abbasid Caliphate was the intellectual capital of the world. The House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah, was a center of learning that gathered scholars from across the known world. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, chemistry, architecture, literature, all flourished under a civilization that placed the pursuit of knowledge at the very center of its values. And the foundation of all of that was a concept that is deceptively simple in translation but enormous in its implications. The Arabic word is ilm. It means knowledge, but not just intellectual knowledge. Ilm in the Islamic tradition meant the integration of knowledge with action and character. You did not truly know something unless it changed how you lived. Knowledge that did not transform the knower was considered deficient knowledge. The scholar who knew the truth and did not act on it was considered in a worse position than the ignorant man who at least had the excuse of not knowing. This integration of knowing and being is one of the most powerful frameworks for self-discipline ever articulated. Think about how different this is from the modern relationship with information. We consume enormous quantities of content, information, advice, and knowledge. Podcasts, books, videos, courses. And yet most of it changes nothing about how we actually live. We know we should wake up early. We know we should exercise. We know we should eat well and be present and manage our time intentionally. We know all of it. And we do very little of it consistently. That gap between knowing and doing is the gap that true self-discipline must close. The Islamic scholarly tradition said that gap exists because you have not truly known. True knowledge, ilm in its full sense, produces transformation. If you have heard the truth and remain unchanged, you have not yet received it into the place that matters. You have stored it in your mind, but not your character. And the work of self-discipline is precisely the work of moving truth from your head into your life. Now let us talk about the concept that sits at the very center of Islamic self-discipline. The Arabic word is nafs. It is often translated as the self, or the soul, or the ego, but none of these translations fully captures it. The nafs is the animating inner self, the part of you that has desires, impulses, appetites, and habitual patterns. The part of you that wants comfort, pleasure, recognition, and ease. The part of you that resists difficulty, resents discipline, and seeks the path of least resistance. And the Islamic tradition, both the scholarly mainstream and the Sufi spiritual path, understood the cultivation of the self, the disciplining and purification of the nafs, as the central work of a human life. Not a side project. Not something you do after you have sorted out your career and your relationships and your health. The central work. The one that everything else depends on. The Quran itself describes the nafs in 3 stages that represent a complete map of spiritual and psychological development. The first stage is Nafs al-Ammara, the commanding self. This is the nafs in its undisciplined state. It commands you toward what it wants. It is dominated by appetite, impulse, and desire. It reacts rather than chooses. It is governed by whatever it craves in the moment. This is the default state of the undisciplined person. The second stage is Nafs al-Lawwama, the self-reproaching self. This is the stage of awareness. The person at this stage knows when they have fallen short. They feel the tension between what they did and what they know they should have done. They are in the struggle. They are not consistently acting well, but they are aware of the gap, and the awareness creates the motivation to close it. This is painful but necessary. It is the training ground. The third stage is Nafs al-Mutmainna, the tranquil self. This is the nafs that has been trained, refined, and disciplined to the point where its impulses are in alignment with its values. The person at this stage does not experience their discipline as a constant battle against themselves. They have built their character to the point where right action arises naturally, without the exhausting daily war against every impulse. This is the destination. Not ease in the sense of passivity, but ease in the sense of inner alignment. The man who does what is right because he has become the kind of man for whom right action is natural. This three-stage map is one of the most psychologically accurate and practically useful frameworks for understanding the journey of self-discipline that has ever been articulated. You begin at Nafs al-Ammara, driven by impulse, governed by appetite, reacting to whatever the moment delivers. You enter Nafs al-Lawwama when you begin this work, when you start becoming aware of your patterns, when you feel the gap between who you are and who you intend to be, when the struggle becomes conscious. And you work toward Nafs al-Mutmainna, where the discipline is no longer experienced as deprivation or effort, but as natural expression of who you have become. Where are you on this map? Be honest. Most people are somewhere between the first and second stage. They have awareness. The fact that you are listening to this tells me you have awareness, but the impulses still frequently win. The work is in the movement from awareness to consistent action, from the self that knows better to the self that consistently does better. That movement is the entire journey of self-discipline. Now I want to bring in the Sufi tradition. Because while the mainstream Islamic scholarly tradition focused on ilm, knowledge and its integration into action, the Sufi tradition developed the most sophisticated psychology of inner transformation in the Islamic world. And some of its insights are extraordinary. The Sufis were the mystics and spiritual masters of the Islamic tradition. They built a complete system of inner development called the tariqah, the path, which was designed to take a student through a systematic process of character refinement, ego dissolution, and spiritual deepening. And the methods they developed are remarkably aligned with what modern psychology understands about behavior change, habit formation, and the development of self-regulation. The most famous Sufi text on inner transformation is the Ihya Ulum al-Din, the revival of the religious sciences, written by Imam al-Ghazali in the 11th century. Al-Ghazali is considered by many historians to be the most influential Muslim thinker after the Prophet himself. He was a man of extraordinary intellectual power who had a complete breakdown of faith in midlife, a crisis of doubt so severe that he lost the ability to speak, and emerged from it transformed. He gave up his prestigious position in Baghdad, walked away from fame and wealth and influence, and spent 11 years in solitude and spiritual practice before returning to write the Ihya. The Ihya is essentially a complete manual for the reformation of the inner life. And its framework rests on a concept that al-Ghazali calls muhasaba, self-accounting, or the daily examination of your own soul. He taught that every day, before you sleep, you must sit with yourself and honestly examine what you did and why. Not to punish yourself. Not for performative guilt. But for the same reason a merchant examines his accounts at the end of each trading day, to know exactly where he stands, what he gained, what he lost, and what he needs to do differently tomorrow. This practice of muhasaba is the Islamic tradition's version of the Stoic evening review we discussed in episode 4. But al-Ghazali goes deeper. He says that muhasaba must examine not just your actions but your intentions. Because intention, niyya, is in the Islamic tradition the foundation of the moral value of any action. Two men can perform the same action with entirely different intentions and produce entirely different results in terms of their character development. This is a profound insight for self-discipline. It means that the question you must ask about your habits and practices is not just what am I doing, but why am I doing it? Are you disciplined because you genuinely value the person that discipline is building? Or are you disciplined because you fear the judgment of others, because you want to look a certain way, because your ego demands a performance of self-improvement. The action may look the same from the outside. The internal reality is completely different. And it is the internal reality that shapes your character. Let us talk now about one of the most powerful practices in the Islamic and Sufi tradition, one that is directly applicable to your life regardless of your religious background. The practice is called muraqabah. It is often translated as watchfulness or mindful self-observation. And it is essentially a practice of bringing continuous, gentle awareness to your inner state throughout the day. The Sufi teachers described muraqabah as the practice of remembering, in every moment, that you are being observed. Not by other people, by your own highest standards, by your own deepest values, by the part of yourself that knows what is right. The practice is to carry that awareness with you throughout the day so that no moment, no choice, no impulse passes unobserved. Not as paranoia, as consciousness. Think about how you behave when you know someone you deeply respect is watching. You are more careful, more intentional, more aligned with your best self. You say what you mean. You follow through on what you commit to. You manage your impulses more carefully. Now imagine cultivating that level of awareness independently of external observation. Imagine being that intentional not because someone is watching but because you have developed the inner observer, the part of yourself that is always watching yourself, so thoroughly that it never goes offline. That is muraqabah. And it produces exactly what the Spartan concept of sophrosyne produces. A man whose conduct is governed from the inside rather than the outside. A man who is the same in private as he is in public. Not because he fears being caught, but because his inner observer has become his most demanding and most consistent audience. Al-Ghazali also wrote extensively about the diseases of the heart, the inner states that corrupt character and undermine self-discipline. He identified pride, envy, greed, anger, love of praise, and cowardice as the primary diseases. And he noted that each of these diseases has a specific antidote, a practice or quality that, cultivated consistently, displaces the disease and builds its opposite virtue. Pride is treated by genuine humility, envy by gratitude and sincerely wishing others well, greed by generosity, anger by patience, love of praise by the cultivation of inner sincerity, cowardice by deliberate acts of courage. This is not moralistic advice. This is a practical map of psychological inner work. The diseases Al-Ghazali describes are not abstract vices. They are the specific inner states that show up in your life as the patterns that undermine your discipline. Pride shows up as the refusal to admit you are wrong and need to change. Envy shows up as resentment of others' success that poisons your own focus. Greed shows up as the inability to delay gratification. Anger shows up as the reactive patterns that override your considered judgment. Love of praise shows up as performing discipline for an audience rather than living it in private. Cowardice shows up as the avoidance of every difficult thing. Look at that list honestly. Which of those diseases is most active in you? Which one is most reliably undermining your discipline? That is the one to work on first. Not in general terms, but with the specific antidote. The disease of envy. Take deliberate, consistent action to genuinely celebrate others' successes. The disease of anger. Practice patience in small provocations deliberately, building the muscle for larger ones. Each antidote, practiced consistently, is a form of self-discipline that shapes the inner life rather than just the outer behavior. Now I want to talk about one of the most remarkable figures in this tradition. His name is Ibn Battuta. You may know him as the greatest traveler of the medieval world, a Moroccan scholar who between 1325 and 1354 traveled approximately 120,000 kilometers, visiting the equivalent of 44 modern countries, more than any other explorer before the age of modern transportation. He crossed deserts, survived shipwrecks, served as a judge in the Maldives, visited the court of the Mali Empire, traveled to China, and wrote one of the most extraordinary accounts of the medieval world ever produced. What made Ibn Battuta remarkable was not his distance traveled. It was his inner formation, his Nafs, that made the journey possible. He was a man of extraordinary patience, adaptability, resilience, and equanimity. He faced complete loss multiple times, shipwrecks that destroyed everything he owned, political situations that threatened his life, illness, imprisonment, betrayal by companions. And he continued. Not because the external circumstances were favorable. Because his inner resources were inexhaustible. The inner formation he had received through his Islamic scholarly education, the ilm, the muhasaba, the discipline of the Nafs, had built a man who could function with excellence regardless of what the external world delivered. He was a walking demonstration of what the tradition was designed to produce. A person whose center was so thoroughly established that no external storm could displace it. That quality, the center that holds regardless of external storms, is the ultimate destination of all the self-discipline we have discussed in this series. Not just discipline in comfortable conditions. The center that holds when everything is against you. When you have lost what you built. When the conditions are nothing like what you planned for. When the storm is at full force. That center is built in exactly the way Ibn Battuta built it, through consistent, daily, unglamorous inner work. Through muhasaba and muraqabah. Through the honest examination of the diseases of the heart and the deliberate cultivation of their antidotes. Through the movement, day by day, toward Nafs al-Mutmainna. Let me now bring in the concept of sabr. This is perhaps the most important single concept in the Islamic tradition for self-discipline, and it is one of the most misunderstood words in translation. Sabr is almost always translated as patience. But patience in English sounds passive. It sounds like waiting. Sabr is not waiting. Sabr is active endurance. It is the decision to remain steady, to continue, and to maintain your standards under conditions of difficulty, loss, delay, or pain, not because the difficulty has gone away, but because your commitment to your values is greater than your desire for the difficulty to stop. The Prophet Muhammad is reported to have said that sabr is half of faith, not a peripheral virtue, half, the equal of everything else. Because everything worth building in life, character, relationships, knowledge, mastery, anything real, takes time and costs difficulty. And the thing that determines whether you complete the journey or abandon it before it is finished is sabr. Patient, active endurance. The Islamic scholars distinguished between 3 levels of sabr. The first is sabr from what is prohibited, the discipline to refrain from what is harmful even when you want it. This is the most basic level. The discipline of the Nafs in its most fundamental form. The second is sabr in fulfilling obligations, the discipline to do what you have committed to doing even when you do not feel like it, even when it is difficult, even when the motivation has left. This is consistency. This is showing up. This is the unglamorous daily practice. The third level is sabr in accepting what cannot be changed, the equanimity to face loss, failure, and adversity without being destroyed by it. This is the deepest level, the one that requires the most thoroughly developed inner life to sustain. You can map your entire self-discipline practice onto these 3 levels. Where are you strongest? Where do you fall short? The first level, refraining from what is harmful, that is the discipline of appetite and impulse. The second, fulfilling your obligations consistently, that is the discipline of consistency and commitment. The third, equanimity in the face of what cannot be changed, that is the discipline of the soul. You need all 3, and they build on each other. The man who cannot do the first level will struggle with the second. The man who struggles with the second will be destroyed by the tests that require the third. Let me close with something that sits at the very heart of the Islamic discipline tradition, the concept of tawadu. Humility. Not as a social performance, not as the self-deprecation that masquerades as modesty, but genuine, earned, cultivated humility that comes from truly knowing yourself. Your actual strengths and your actual weaknesses. Your capacity and your limitations. Where you have grown and where you still fall short. The Islamic scholars taught that genuine humility is not a starting point, it is an arrival. You do not begin with humility. You work your way toward it through the honest, consistent practice of muhasaba. Through really looking at yourself. Through sitting with the gap between your ideals and your reality long enough to stop defending it and start closing it. Through the accumulated experience of seeing yourself fall short and getting back up enough times that arrogance becomes genuinely impossible. You know too well who you actually are. And here is the paradox. The man who has genuinely cultivated tawadu, who knows himself clearly, without inflation and without deflation, is the most formidable man in any room. Because he is not spending any energy on the maintenance of an image. He has no ego investment in being seen a certain way. He is completely available for the truth. He can hear hard feedback without collapsing. He can acknowledge error without shame spiraling. He can learn from anyone. He can begin again without drama. He is, in the deepest sense, free. That freedom, the freedom of the man who knows himself clearly and has nothing to defend, is the destination the Islamic tradition of inner discipline points toward. And it is built the same way everything real is built. In private, daily, without applause, through the honest examination of who you are, who you intend to be, and what it will take to close the gap between the two. So what do you take from today into your life? Start with muhasabah. Tonight, before you sleep, sit for 10 minutes and ask yourself 3 questions. Where did my nafs lead me somewhere I did not intend to go today? Where did I act in alignment with my deepest values? And what do I want to do differently tomorrow? Do this every night. Not as guilt, as honest accounting, as the merchant examining his books. Practice muraqabah during your day. Carry the inner observer with you. Before you act on an impulse, before you react to a provocation, before you take the easy exit, pause and check in with your own deepest standard. Not what you can get away with. What the best version of you would do. Identify your primary disease of the heart, the one inner pattern that most reliably undermines your discipline, and begin working its antidote deliberately and consistently. Not all of them at once. The one that is most active. That is where the work is. And cultivate sabr, not as passive waiting but as active, decided, committed endurance. When the difficulty comes, and it will come, do not ask when it will end. Ask what it is asking of you. Meet it with the full force of your intention and your values and your character. Let it be the thing that proves what you have built. The desert produced some of the most extraordinary inner lives in human history. Not despite its harshness. Because of it. Your desert is wherever you are right now. Build something real in it. This is SERA Self Discipline. Episode 8. Deep Mind. Real Grit. I will see you in the next one.